This video is brought to you by Eargasm. What's up, castaways? This is Miles Away. Welcome back to another video. So I got some great response on last week's video looking back at the OB6 and seeing if it's still worth it in 2022. So I decided to take another look back at what's probably my second most used synth after the OB6, the Novation Summit. Back when I got the Novation Summit in 2019, it was the most expensive piece of gear in my studio, and I really thought long and hard before purchasing a flagship synth like this. However, now in 2022, there's a whole lot more options. I feel like every single year, a crazy new synth gets released, and the market has changed a lot. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys a demo track I made using only the Novation Summit. I'm going to walk you guys through creating a patch from scratch and see how the workflow would be. I'm going to tell you guys my pros and cons, my train of thought, and of course, at the end, I'll give you just some basic sound examples by itself. If you like this video, please do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe. It's free for you, but it really does help me. We just hit 11,000 subscribers, which is insane. I really appreciate the love. I like making these videos for you guys as well as making music. So stick around, you're in the right place for all that good stuff. So that demo song was entirely made with the Novation Summit with no effects whatsoever besides just basic EQ and compression in Logic. Now, if that's not a testament to how versatile this synth is, then I don't know what is. Pads, leads, plucks, you name it, the Summit can do anything. I think a lot of that comes down to how great the filter sounds. Like I've mentioned in pretty much all my videos, having a really great filter is one of the most important things you can have on a synth. But you know what's even more important? Preserving your hearing and avoiding hearing loss. That's why today's sponsor is Eargasm. Now, I've spent most of my life and my early years either playing in bands, DJing, or just attending live shows with my friends. Now, I'm sad to say that a lot of those early years, I wasn't the most responsible, I didn't wear earplugs to shows, and I definitely paid for it some days after with some ringing in my ears. Now, eventually, after one particularly loud show, I decided enough was enough and I had to protect my ears. As musicians and music lovers, our ears are our most valuable asset, so from that day on, I decided to wear earplugs whenever I would go to shows. However, wearing earplugs was always a real trade-off for me, as no matter the brand I used, the sound quality would always suck and it would sound like I was listening to music underwater with absolutely no high frequencies. As a music lover, this really ruined the experience for me because all of a sudden I wasn't able to enjoy the shows and the bands and the music I was used to enjoying. But with Eargasm earplugs, that's no longer a problem. Now, Eargasm's earplugs are not only designed to reduce sound to a safe level for hearing, but also not to lose out on high frequencies. Not only that, they're actually comfortable. Now, at first, I was skeptical because of how generic earplugs have not worked for me in the past, but with Eargasm earplugs, I was so shocked at how transparent they were, and at a certain point, I actually almost forgot I was wearing them. They come in a whole bunch of different sizes and models based on comfort and how much sound reduction you need. So you'll almost certainly find a pair that works perfectly for you. Before I tried these out, I was reluctant to include an ad in my video, but after trying them, I can honestly say they surprised me with how incredibly well they work, and I will absolutely be taking these to any future shows from now on. So if you're interested in protecting your hearing so that you can enjoy music and synthesizers for many more years, then check out the link below in my description to get a pair of Eargasm earplugs today. Thanks again to Eargasm for sponsoring today's video, and thanks if you decide to check out the link in the description. Now, the Novation Summit and Peak were in part designed by British synth legend Chris Huggett. Now, Chris sadly passed away in 2020, but he was responsible for designing in part some of the classic synths such as the Wasp, the Oscar. Now, I think this level of synth expertise really goes to show in the workflow and especially just how logically everything is thought out. Now, what I mean by that is the synth has the type of workflow where almost everything you'll need for 80% of patches is right there on the front panel, and you won't need much menu diving for it. But within a clever series of menus, the possibilities are endless. There's just tons and tons of options within the mod matrix, the effects mod matrix, and then multiple parameters for every single thing, such as the envelopes, the delay filters, all that kind of stuff. So let's jump on the front panel and I'll walk you guys through designing a patch from scratch while speaking my thoughts on the panel of the synth, what I like about it, what I don't. All right, so here we are on the front panel. Let's start by initializing a preset. So we do that by clicking this button here. So you'll notice right away that the sound is actually pretty dark compared to a lot of other synths. We can brighten that up a bit by turning down the keyboard tracking, which is by default on. That's much better to me. Now, one thing I do want to mention right off the bat, which we'll kind of get into more with my pros and cons later, but this is a very dark synth naturally. I think that's why so many people think it sounds warm, myself included, but it really isn't as bright as you'd expect from a synth that has wavetables, a synth that has FM, so bear that in mind. Right off the bat, I always like to add in some diverge and drift into my oscillators. That's much better. As by themselves, the oscillators on the Summit and Peak are a little bit lifeless, I hate to say, but don't let that fool you because there's so many things you can do by tweaking them to get them to sound just as good as any top synth, and it really does go a long way, all the little features you have. So diverge and drift, obviously two of the big ones, which will kind of help give those VCO type nuances to the tuning of the individual oscillators and the individual voices. Another thing that I think is pretty much a must for every single patch you design on this is using a little bit of the overdrive and then turning down the VCA gain a little bit. That to me is already sounding like a much nicer starting point because again, this is maybe not necessarily a limitation, but just something to know because this is such a synth that rewards tweaking and sound design and kind of getting lost in the sauce. The synth really does have quite a big range of gain that it can go from very, very quiet sounds to ridiculously clipping, loud, distorted sounds. So as a best practice, I find the synth sounds best if you're not turning all the oscillators up to full, you're not turning VCA gain up to full, and then you're gain staging it with one of the three or a mix of the three distortions that the Summit and Peak have. Let's go ahead and bring in another oscillator. Let's do a triangle for this one. Awesome. Yeah, I'll just quickly go through all the wave shapes. They all do sound really good. So triangle, saw, square. Then we have a whole bunch of wavetables. We will go back to a wavetable for our third oscillator, but for now, let's use a triangle. Okay, cool. On to the second thing I really love about the Summit and the Peak, even in 2022, is the fact that every single oscillator, whether it's a sine, whether it's a triangle, whether it's a weird wavetable, they can all be modulated for their wave shape on the front panel really easily. I love that little metallic overtone we're getting there. Let's mix that in quietly with our saw. And then let's put it up an octave. So easy, right? Can detune it if we want. Go semitones. Kind of like it as a fifth, actually. We'll have it be a really subtle overtone. Okay, and for our last oscillator, we'll go into a wavetable, but let's try to just get a nice sounding mix first. Kind of like that. That's sounding nice. It's adding a lot of top end that I like. Again, we'll play with the wave shape. Being honest, I think I like it just at standard. All right, cool. So we're getting close already to a nice sounding kind of wavetable-y, metallic-y, interesting pad. And then let's jump into our filter section here. The filter section, one of the absolute best things about this synth, and again, it kind of goes back to my intro about how I think they've really struck a great balance, even in 2022, compared to a lot of other synths, of what's easily available in the front panel, but yet having a whole bunch of menu diving available for really deep sound design if you like. So right on the front panel, we're going to be able to add some ring modulation. It's going to be easier to hear if I'm doing something that's not a fifth or an octave. Sounds really good. This is really great for those ripping and tearing pads, especially when you hit it with distortion after. And then we've also got all sorts of great modulation options on the front panel, like OSC3 filter mod. So if we turn down our filter, that's a little intense right now, but the whole idea is that having something like that right on the front panel, basically OSC3 FM to filter, really powerful. A little bit of LFO1 depth for that classic wub wub, the dubstep. Gotta love it. We'll just keep that really subtle for now. And then, of course, also we've looked at, keyboard tracking. That's going to be kind of nice to bring it back in for a pad. See, it's already sounding pretty good. The aforementioned overdrive, I always use this on every single patch. The drive, all three drive stages on the Summit are some of the nicest sounding overdrives on any synth, Peak as well. And then, yeah, of course, to the star of the show here, we'll go to the actual filter itself. Let's check out a couple different ones. So this is the 24 dB low pass. I probably use this one the most out of any of them. Add some resonance in. Super nice filter. Definitely very smooth still, so you know it's a really good filter. We'll jump to the 12 dB. I love the sound of a 12 dB or 2-pole filter. That's beautiful. I think that might be the one for this sound, but let's check out some of the other modes. You got band pass in 12 or 24. Very useful. Bandpass filters are really great for any sort of kind of like old vintage sounding keys you want to do, where it's going to be more focused on the mid-range, because most speakers back in the day, like an old car radio, would have very little low end and very little top end and be all mid-range focused. So it can be a really nice nostalgic sound. High pass. I really like the 12 dB high pass filter on this too. And then of course our dual filter modes. Let's check those out. Okay, returning from the dual filter modes. So I'm going to use the 12 dB low pass filter for this because I really like it. Get the resonance down a bit. Awesome. So right there, that's already sounding real nice. But what we can do here is we can move on to the envelopes. So The envelopes being sliders, it's a small touch, but I much prefer sliders to knobs. Let me know in the comments what you prefer between sliders and knobs. But for me, I can always visualize the envelope a lot more if it's a slider, and it's, you know, two of the nicest feeling envelopes to use for sure there. We've also got an easy toggle between envelope 1 and 2. I love that there's a third completely assignable auxiliary envelope. Really helpful. Let's actually use that now. Let's assign that to resonance. Okay, moving on, let's go to the voicing section. And here is another really great thing about the Summit that I really enjoy, which is how many different modes you can choose from for unison, for detune, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do here is, because I want this to be a really big wide pad, I'm going to actually make each one of the notes I play take up 3 of the Summit's voices and then spread those all along the stereo spectrum. Now, watch, immediately we go from what we heard before to now this. Sounds really awesome. And we're going to add in a little bit of detune to those voices. Nice, we're getting really close to the sound I'm looking for. Cool. Let's move on to the filter drive. Bump up the filter drive. Like I mentioned, I love to gain stage in multiple iterations here. And then bump up the filter diverge. Now this is a really subtle effect, but basically it's going to make each of the voices have a slightly different filter position. Sounding super lush. Okay, let's move on to effects, and then I think we've got a great sounding pad. Now, already, if you've heard any demos of the Peak or the Summit, you guys know the reverb sounds amazing. To this day, still my favorite sounding built-in hardware synth reverb. I quite like algorithm 3, so we'll change to that and we'll cut out some of the low end. There you go, that's more like it. And then moving on to the delay here. We'll use a little bit of delay. And previously, you know, one of my pieces of feedback would have been the delay is a little bit boring, a little bit pedestrian, but they've added in the newest firmware update a whole bunch of different modes. I quite like quad lo-fi here. It's a little bit more, you hear that bit crushing downsampling. It's a bit more of a lo-fi dirty delay. Amazing. Okay, now next thing I'm gonna do here, I'm actually gonna turn down the VCA gain even more. And then I'm gonna hit it with the distortion. Let's turn down that resonance on the envelope a little bit. That's a bit intense. You know, see, as we go, we decide to shape the sound more and more, and now I'm feeling like there's a little bit too much low end in our pad, so I'm going to turn up the shape of that saw wave here. Beautiful. And the very last step is going to be to add in the chorus. Lovely. No, the chorus just sounds really, really great. Add in just a little bit of envelope 1 shape here on the filter. That's already sounding really great. For the finishing touch though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, go back to the amazing amount of front panel modulation control and go in and add in a little bit of LFO2 to the pitch of all three oscillators. It's a subtle effect, but we love that detuning. Alright, now before we finish up with some sound examples, I'm going to give you guys my pros and cons, my concluding thoughts. So for the pros, the Summit has a wonderful sound. You know, never once am I thinking, oh, this is digital. Again, the oscillators like we looked at can be a little bit basic on their own, but they give you so many tools to sculpt the sound that the final product can compete with pretty much any other synth I own. Another pro I really love that I mentioned already is the distortion on the Summit is absolutely amazing. You know, both the Summit and the Peak have, I think, the most unique distortion in that they have 3 separate distortion and drive circuits. That's real special for a synth, and it really adds a lot of sculpting power to the sound as well. The next thing I love about the Summit and the Peak is how many different filter types it has and how that really lends it to being this chameleon jack of all trades flagship synth. Now, obviously, it's got a great sounding 24 dB low pass filter, but like we already looked at, I love the 12 dB filters for high pass and low pass as well. The next pro for the Summit and the Peak is the fact that the mod matrix, especially after this newest firmware update, has pretty much been updated to be like a modular synthesizer inside a box. Basically, you can go as deep or as shallow as you want to with this synth, and that's the kind of thing that makes me, still finding new sounds and new tips and tricks on it almost 3 years after I own it. Another pro for the Summit is the amazing sounding FM that's right on the front panel. Now, I wish more synths did this. It's one of the easiest ways to beef up a sound and make something more interesting than your typical subtractive synthesis, and I use it all the time. Here's an example of taking a basic bass, using a little bit of FM, and watch how much more amazing it sounds. The final pro, and this one's just for the Summit and not for the Peak, is the bitimbrality. Now, I know we didn't look at that too much in this video, but it really is great to see bitimbral synths. Now, I don't use them too much in my own music as I multi-track everything, but it's still great and it makes for an easy feature that I wish more manufacturers would add. For the cons, I've only got a couple, but they are worth mentioning. Now, first and foremost, I definitely do think that the fact that the synth is naturally a bit darker, while great sounding and warm, can really lead to some frustration where you're gonna have to use EQ for a lot of professionally mixed and mastered tracks you would want to use the Summit within. Now, obviously that's not the end of the world. It's pretty easy to grab an EQ, but the Summit also does have a decently high noise floor that, you're going to be bringing up the noise as well. And it's not going to be quite as clean as, some of my other synths when I'm recording it, where you can pretty much just record it into a good preamp or, a good audio interface. And there you go, presto, doesn't need any EQ or anything. It's very much a synth where it's going to take some love to get it to sit in the mix, but once you do, it sounds great. Now, the second con, I kind of am going to contradict myself a bit here. While I mentioned the mod matrix and the amount of depth the synth has is great, I do think that the way the mod matrix works with everything being done with the encoder and within the screen is a little bit inferior to something like on the Dave Smith Pro 3, Pro 2, the Moog Sub 37, where you're basically just touching knobs to assign mod sources and mod destinations. I still think that is the superior way to work. And the Novation Summit, because it doesn't have this, is a little bit slower than those synths for designing sounds. However, once you get used to it, it's really no more complicated than, programming a plugin. And again, you barely even have to use that for 80% of the patches. It's only there for certain sounds if you really want to go deeper and really access the fine parameters. As for cons, that's pretty much it. Overall, I really think it's a great sounding synth, and my final thoughts would be the Peak and the Summit are absolutely still worth it as long as you understand going into it that you're getting a synth that is a jack of all trades, a chameleon, and probably your workhorse synth. I still think that for inspiration, I'm reaching for some of my other keyboards like the OB6 or the Moog Matriarch more often than not, but the Summit, it gets on every single one of my tracks, and it's hard to say the same about almost any single synth. Alright guys, thanks as always for watching. Thanks to Eargasm for sponsoring this video. Let's jump to some sound examples for the outro, and I'll see you guys in the next video.